power isn't lost in betrayal. It's lost in a glance, in a sigh, in a sentence that started too softly. Most people believe power is stripped from them in grand, dramatic moments: failure, rejection, collapse. But Machiavelli knew the truth. Power dies quietly, invisibly, through emotional leaks so small you don't even realize they're happening. You're not overthrown. You're read. And once you're read, you're mapped. And once you're mapped, you can be controlled. This is why Machiavelli didn't fear enemies. He feared transparency. Not of words, but of emotion. Because it is emotion, not logic, that reveals your leverage points. What makes you nervous? What excites you? What makes you hesitate? These things don't need to be confessed. They radiate from your face, from your tone, from your timing. You don't say them. You broadcast them. And in that broadcast is the blueprint to break you. If you knew how often you've been silently sized up, you'd be horrified. If you understood how easily your emotional state is read by someone who knows what to look for, you'd stop calling yourself private. You're not private. You're porous. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. That's why he built walls, not just around cities, but around expressions. And if you want to be unreadable, unshakable, and ultimately untouchable, you must learn to conceal 7 emotions. Not because they are evil, but because they are visible. 1. Eagerness. Eagerness is not excitement. It's not ambition. It's the emotional scent of desperation. It's what you radiate when you want something more than you're willing to admit: attention, status, validation, opportunity. And in that want, you reveal a power imbalance. You've told the world, you have something I need. And once that statement is made, even silently, you've lost your edge. You may think you're just being polite, agreeable, enthusiastic. But your eagerness leaks in the way you overrespond to texts, in how quickly you answer questions, in how often you say yes before understanding the terms. You praise too quickly. You nod too much. You arrive too early. And every one of those signals tells the other person, I value you more than you value me. That's how leverage dies. Machiavelli would say the one who chases is already beneath the one who withholds. Eagerness makes you readable. And readability kills mystery. And mystery is half of power. Walk into a room with need in your eyes, and the room instinctively lowers your status. Not with words, not even consciously, but instinctively. Because your hunger becomes their confidence. And when you're detached, that same room grows cautious. That's control. Train yourself to delay your reactions. To pause before you speak. To look like you're observing instead of proving. Say less. Nod slower. Don't fill silence with affirmations. Because in every social environment, the one who seems least eager is assumed to be in charge, not because they have more, but because they need less. That's power. 2. Conflicted admiration. This is the emotion of duality. You admire someone, but you envy them too. You respect their success, but you resent that it's not yours. So what comes out of you is a hybrid emotion, part praise, part bitterness. And even if you think you're hiding it, you're not. Because energy doesn't lie. Your tone reveals the fracture. Your compliments contain barbs. Your eyes flash tension when they speak. And they notice. Machiavelli would have banished this emotion from any court. Not because it's wrong to compare, but because it's lethal to show it. When you admire someone who has what you want, you have 2 options. Admire fully and let it humble you. Or cut off admiration completely and observe from distance. But this in-between, this limbo of half support and quiet resentment, is the emotional signature of a threat. And people can feel it. You think you're hiding it, but your posture gives it away. The timing of your praise gives it away. The fact that you always seem tense around their success gives it away. You're not invisible. You're transparent. And people will stop trusting you, not because you did anything wrong, but because you feel conflicted around their victory. To kill this emotion, you must cut the comparison reflex. Who makes you feel small? Who do you talk about with forced neutrality? Who do you support in public but avoid in private? That's your trigger. And Machiavelli would say, either honor them openly or disappear. Because conflicted admiration is worse than hate. It's visible submission wrapped in denial. And once they see it, they know exactly how to trigger your insecurity. 3. Anticipatory doubt. This is not fear. Fear is reactive. This is proactive weakness. It's what you show before anything goes wrong. It's the disclaimer before your sentence. The, I might be wrong but, that slips out of your mouth. The hesitation before a bold idea. The subtle energy that you've already braced for failure before anything has even happened. And the world picks up on it instantly. This is one of the most common and dangerous emotional leaks, because you don't think it's a leak. You think it's humility. But what you're really doing is broadcasting uncertainty. And Machiavelli knew, uncertainty invites attack. The moment your voice drops, the moment your eyes dart, the moment your shoulders shrink, you've told everyone in the room, now is the time to challenge me. People don't need to hate you to test you. Sometimes, all they need is a tiny sign that you don't believe in yourself. Anticipatory doubt is that sign. And it opens the gates to every social predator who is waiting for an opening. You flinch. They strike. To eliminate this emotion, kill the reflex to soften your ideas. When you speak, speak with clarity. Even if you're unsure. You don't need to lie. You need to hold. When someone pushes, let the silence sit. Don't rush to defend. Let their question echo while you remain still. The less doubt you reveal, the more people back off, not because you're right, but because you're unreadable. These 3 emotions, eagerness, conflicted admiration, anticipatory doubt, are the foundation of emotional leakage. But they are only the beginning. There are 4 more. Subtler, harder to spot, but just as dangerous. 4. Involuntary gratitude. Gratitude sounds virtuous. And it is. But not when it's offered as a reflex. When you thank people too much, too often, too quickly, what you're really doing is positioning yourself beneath them. You may think you're being polite. But Machiavelli would say you're revealing who the supplicant is. And it's always you. Every thank you is a power exchange. If you thank someone for treating you fairly, what are you saying? That fairness was optional? That you didn't expect it? That they've done you a favor by not mistreating you? That's not gratitude. That's submission in disguise. Powerful people express gratitude precisely and selectively. Never as a reflex. Never as apology. Never in fear of seeming ungrateful. They understand that gratitude, when overused, dilutes both respect and boundaries. So they wait. They thank strategically. And when they do, it carries weight. You want to thank someone? Fine. But ask yourself why. If the reason is fear of losing favor, don't say it. You're not grateful. You're begging. And people can tell. 5. Performative modesty. This is the cousin of anticipatory doubt. The worse. Because it's not just uncertainty, it's disguise. You deliberately downplay yourself to seem humble. You understate your skill, soften your tone, pretend not to notice your own capability. But the truth is, you want to be seen. You just don't want to seem like you want it. So you hide in modesty, hoping someone will see through it and reward you anyway. That's not humility. That's manipulation. And the problem is, it rarely works. People don't reward quiet strength unless they feel your conviction. When you pretend you're less than you are, most people take your word for it. And now you've positioned yourself below them, voluntarily. Machiavelli would advise a different route. Don't oversell. But don't undersell either. Speak with measured confidence. Say what you are without apology. Let your tone match your truth. Because when you downplay too much, people stop seeing you as capable. And in politics, whether in court or conversation, that's the first step toward irrelevance. Still, the worst leaks are not visible to others alone. Some of them poison your own mind first. 6. Explanatory guilt. This is the emotion that makes you feel like you owe people a reason. For your ambition. For your silence. For your standards. You want something, and you feel the need to soften it with backstory. You distance your desire with disclaimers. You pre-justify your goals so others won't feel threatened. And Machiavelli would call that self-sabotage. Power is not polite. Power is not apologetic. Power doesn't explain. Demoose. And the more you explain yourself, the more you expose your uncertainty. especially when no one asked. People who feel guilty for having standards always end up with none. People who feel guilty for wanting more always get less. And people who feel guilty for setting boundaries always end up trampled. Stop over-explaining. You don't need to convince people you're good before you act. Let them figure out who you are afterward. 7. Reactive empathy. Empathy is a virtue. Until it becomes a liability. Until it's no longer a conscious decision but an emotional reflex. You feel someone's discomfort and you adjust. You see someone's insecurity and you shrink yourself. You hear someone's frustration and you soften your truth. You don't speak from position. You speak from emotional echo. And in that echo, you lose clarity. Machiavelli wouldn't tell you to kill your empathy. He'd tell you to weaponize it. Empathy is insight. It's a map. But if you feel obligated to ease everyone's feelings, you'll lose every negotiation before it begins. Because now you're not the strategist. You're the mirror. And mirrors never lead. They reflect. To stay in control, you must decide when empathy serves the mission. And when it doesn't, you must learn to hold tension. Let people feel. Let them wrestle with discomfort. You don't have to fix it. You have to endure it. Because the one who holds stillness longest wins. Now imagine yourself stripped of these 7 emotional leaks. No eagerness. No conflicted admiration. No anticipatory doubt. No involuntary gratitude. No performative modesty. No explanatory guilt. No reactive empathy. What's left? A presence. A calm. A force. You're still feeling, but you're no longer bleeding. And that alone puts you in the top 1% of people others don't want to cross. Machiavelli didn't believe in emotional suppression. He believed in emotional containment. You feel, but you don't leak. You think, but you don't narrate. You observe, but you don't perform. And in that silence, in that stillness, people begin to recalibrate around you. They phrase things more carefully. They reveal more than they should. They want your reaction more than you want theirs. That's the reversal. And that's what Machiavelli knew. Silence isn't emptiness. It's leverage. And your emotional stillness is not numbness. It's proof. Proof that you can't be baited. That you won't be mapped. That no one, not ally, not enemy, gets access to your center unless you hand them the key. And that key is never emotional. It is always strategic. So hold the pause. Let the room adjust. Let others fill the silence. You've already won. So hold the pause. Let the room adjust. Let others fill the silence. You've already won. Because once you stop leaking emotion, people stop seeing you as someone they can sway. You're no longer the person who adjusts to the mood of others. You are the mood. You are the frame they react to. And this shift doesn't scream. It hums quietly, with precision. The less you express, the more others reveal. You become the space where people expose themselves, not because you interrogate, but because they can't stand the silence you control. This is where Machiavelli's real genius surfaces. He understood the game wasn't about domination through volume, through fear, or even charisma. It was about becoming psychologically unavailable. Not closed. Just unreadable. Because what people can't understand, they can't predict. And what they can't predict, they have to respect. This is why rulers fall, not from war, not from rebellion, but from exposure. The moment a leader becomes emotionally legible, they become tactically vulnerable. The more people understand what you need, what you fear, what you love, the easier it becomes to craft your downfall. One lever at a time. Pulled in private. Until you're bent in public. But you now are no longer legible. You've erased the 7 signals that betrayed your position. And in their place, you've built something far stronger than a personality. You've built presence. You don't have to prove your value anymore. It radiates. You don't chase influence. It gravitates toward you. People speak slower around you. They look for cues in your face. They second-guess their own words. But because they can't read you. And that makes them careful. Care is power. Here's the deeper truth Machiavelli would whisper behind closed doors. Silence isn't just a defensive strategy. It's an offensive weapon. Because when you stop responding to pressure, people begin to feel their own instability. They project their doubts onto you. They overcompensate. They confess things you didn't ask. And suddenly, without saying a word, you've won control of the dynamic. It's not magic. Subtract reaction. Subtract eagerness. Subtract guilt. Subtract the 7 betrayals. What remains is clarity. And clarity intimidates, because it forces others to see themselves reflected in someone who is not flinching. Someone who is not adjusting. Someone who has already made their calculations and doesn't need to say them out loud. This is how psychological dominance works. Not by speaking more, but by controlling what's left unsaid. The strongest man in the room isn't the one who declares his power. It's the one who doesn't need to, because silence in the right hands becomes command, and emotion in the wrong hands becomes ammunition. You've noticed it by now, how people react when you don't explain yourself, when you don't justify a boundary, when you let an insult hover unanswered. They start to shift. They either escalate, trying to provoke a response, or they retreat, afraid of what they just awoke. Either way, you win, because what they're really reacting to isn't your silence. It's your discipline. That's what Machiavelli meant when he said, "The prince must learn to be both lion and fox." The lion roars. The fox observes. You don't need to roar anymore. You're already being watched. Because silence is now your growl. Stillness is now your teeth. People will test it. They will try to draw you out. They'll share vulnerable stories, hoping you'll reciprocate. They'll overpraise you, hoping to awaken your eagerness. They'll express doubt, hoping you'll rush to reassure them. But you won't. Because you've studied the game long enough to know. Most people don't ask to understand you. They ask to locate your buttons. And your buttons are gone. Removed. Disconnected. Hidden so deep beneath deliberate presence that even the sharpest manipulator can't reach them. You still feel. But they don't see it. And that's the entire advantage. You are not heartless. You are controlled. You are not emotionless. You are sovereign over emotion. You don't give people access to your emotional GPS. They don't get to track your mood, your triggers, your pressure points. You've shut off the signal. Now they're wandering blind. And people who are blind become cautious. They don't move fast. They don't push hard. They tread lightly. That's your field. That's your power zone. Because what you've become is not just unreadable. You've become psychologically asymmetrical. They show emotion. You don't. They react. You remain. They seek validation. You withhold yours. They speak to be heard. You speak only when it shifts the room. And that imbalance becomes unbearable for them. They try to solve you, but every theory fails. They try to bait you, but the line goes slack. They try to define you, but your silence keeps rewriting their assumptions. And eventually they surrender, not out of fear, but out of fatigue. Trying to manipulate someone who gives nothing away is exhausting. And exhaustion breeds respect. At this level, your words mean more. Because they're rare. Your opinions mean more. Because they aren't automatic. Your presence means more. Because people know it's not a performance. You've stopped reacting to be liked. You've started commanding respect through self-possession. And people sense it. This is the phase Machiavelli aimed for. Not just external control, but internal clarity so strong that external manipulation becomes laughable. You don't fall into arguments anymore. You don't explain your silence. You don't correct misunderstandings unless doing so moves the chessboard in your favor. And what about the people who demand more from you? The ones who beg for emotional transparency? The ones who say you've changed? Let them. Let them complain about your stillness. Let them label your restraint as cold. Let them interpret your unreadability as arrogance. They're not describing you. They're revealing themselves, what they need, what they expect, what they've relied on. And you've taken it away. You no longer exist for their comfort. You exist for precision. You're not building bonds through emotional vulnerability. You're building leverage through emotional discipline. And now, those who once needed your openness find themselves uncomfortable. Not because you've become worse, but because you've become less accessible. And less accessible always means more powerful. That's why the emotionally impenetrable are both feared and admired. Because they're not chaotic. They're consistent. And consistency is rare. In a world addicted to emotional volatility, you become the one person people look to when everything else feels unstable. You don't rise to every spark. You don't flinch at every tone shift. You are the storm's eye. Still, unmoved. Absolute. This kind of self-mastery doesn't make you famous. It makes you unforgettable. Not because people know your whole story, but because they never figured you out. They walked away from you unsettled, unsure, careful. And that carefulness is the new hierarchy. You've risen without climbing. You've dominated without attacking. You've taken control without declaring it. That's the Machiavellian way, not to overpower, but to over-clarify. Not to shout, but to signal. And your signals are now silent. What remains of you is posture, stillness, economy of words, emotional precision. And that, paradoxically, makes your presence deafening. Because people listen harder when you say less. They prepare more before they speak to you. They adjust their tone, their pacing, their entire posture. But because you've conditioned them. This is the true result of emotional unreadability. You stop adapting to the world. The world begins adapting to you. And you don't need to celebrate it. You don't even need to notice it. You just continue. Disciplined. Unshaken. Restraint as identity. Distance as design. The fewer signals you leak, the more people project onto you. And in their projection is your freedom. You're not being seen. You're being imagined. And what's imagined is always more powerful than what's revealed. So let them wonder. Let them dissect every glance, every pause, every silence. Let them overthink your tone, your stillness, your lack of reaction. Let them build entire strategies based on decoding a face you no longer expose. While they try to read your eyes, you're already moving on. 3 steps ahead. Quiet. Calculated. That's what Machiavelli meant by power. Not force. Not fear. But a presence so well concealed, so well contained, so emotionally unavailable that people start respecting you, not because you asked, not because you earned it the usual way, but because you've created an atmosphere where disrespect simply doesn't land. Now you've crossed the final threshold. You've become unreadable. And what's unreadable cannot be controlled. Not by flattery. Not by guilt. Not by provocation. Not by emotional bait. This is the final form. Not emptiness. Not numbness. But deliberate silence. Not indifference. But intentional detachment. And in this state, you no longer need to resist the world. Because now, the world resists you. That's its power.